Gardening is a labor of love. Welcome back to the Garden Hutch. Today we'll discuss a few mental and physical health benefits to home gardening. Let's get going. For those of you who regularly follow the channel, you know that I got into gardening because I absolutely love tomatoes. They're incredibly difficult to find a good tomato in the store. Sometimes at the farmer's market, they'll have good tomatoes. But that's the reason that I personally started gardening. The further I got into it, and as years went on, I started to realize that it wasn't just the food part of gardening that was beneficial to me. There were health and mental benefits to that. And so that's what I wanted to discuss today. I wanted to sort of step back from the actual food that we get and talk about the way that the gardening gives back to us. When I first started gardening, the first benefit that I noticed was how calm I was after spending an hour or two in the garden. And so I took a little while to think about what made me calm during this period. And I started to realize that, I'm responsible for this little area of planet Earth. It's small, and it's very modest, but it's ours. And as it went through, what you're doing is you're actually taking the time to care for a plant. You're giving yourself into something that you expect to give back to you. So there's something sort of fulfilling about that. It helps me focus really easily, kind of blocks out all the static or all the noise. And in fact, to this day, if I start getting anxious about something, or if life feels sort of overwhelming, or all these geopolitical events that I have no control over, if I feel myself starting to get anxious or lose focus on what my role is, I can just take an hour to go out to the garden, take care of the garden, and my mind sort of focuses. And whenever I'm finished with that, I can go back to the hard focus of life, deal with making hard choices and that sort of stuff. But having that couple hours every day or so to sort of step back and just take care of our little spot of planet Earth and have no other responsibilities from that, focus on that, it really helps me out from a mental health standpoint. The second thing that I noticed from a mental health standpoint about gardening was I feel accomplished. There comes a lot of gratification when it comes to gardening, and it starts right from the beginning. There are several things that you can be instantly gratified just from an aesthetics appearance whenever you first start your garden, all the way through us gardeners that have been doing it for years and years and years. When you finally perfect a certain technique, or you've worked on sort of making maybe a hybrid tomato all your own, those sorts of things, the sense of accomplishment is never ending. And that's another thing that I learned was anybody that just needs a little self-confidence, you can just pick yourself a little spot in your yard, throw out some dirt, maybe take the grass away, and you can step back and look at it, and that's instant gratification. You took, an hour, 2 hours out of your day, and you begun to build a spot where you can sustain yourself. And there's a lot of pride that comes from a lot of us gardeners in that, knowing that we eat a lot of the food that we grow. We're not to the point here on our homestead yet where we're totally self-sufficient, but that is our goal. We may never reach it, but that's kind of the fun part, right? Is having long-term goals. And back to sort of the point of what we're talking about here is those short-term goals. Maybe even if you take my example, right? Just getting a single tomato out of your first year of gardening is better than it's more fun. It's hard for me to explain how good that felt. Like not knowing hardly anything about gardening. I grew up watching other people do it, but I'd never done it myself. Taking the time to put in a small garden, pick out my own tomato plant, care for it for the year, and then get that first nice, juicy, ripe tomato, it was awesome. But then when I step back and I think back on it, that tomato could have tasted better. So as the year went on and my gardening progressed, I started taking the time to learn those. And then in year 2, when my tomato tasted better, that was even another sense of gratification. So when it comes to gardening, it's a good activity if you're needing something to sort of build your self-confidence. And let's face it, in the world we live in, we could all use a little more self-confidence. And the final mental health benefit we'll discuss today is going to be connecting with the world around you. It doesn't matter if you're in an urban setting, if you're in a rural setting, or if you have a modest homestead like we do here in Arkansas, your garden is going to attract life. If it's a small plot, large plot, whatever, pollinators are going to come in for the flowers. You're going to have birds that'll be interested in the pollinators that are coming around your flowers. So it's going to be teeming with life. Also, just getting out around the garden is going to expose you to sunlight for vitamin D. You're going to have fresh air. It'll just give you a chance to commune with your small space in the world. You know, it doesn't have to be all kumbaya and bongo circles, unless you want it to be. I mean, it can absolutely be that. But just taking a moment to take a deep breath and appreciate the smaller life around you that provides for us in many ways the stuff that we eat, it gives me a focus and a certain level of peace that helps me center and move on with the day. And it makes, stress and things much easier to deal with. We'll move on to the health benefits now. The first thing that I learned when I started gardening is that it seems like everything when you start a garden is heavy. It seems like you're carrying and shoveling and lifting and bending over and prying and cutting, and all of those things are beneficial to our body as long as we stretch and do that kind of stuff. Hard labor in the right amounts and the right environments, that's really good for our bodies. It's good for short-term and long-term health. You hear about seniors doing strength training and that sort of stuff to improve cardio, muscle density and that kind of stuff. And you don't have to wait till you're a senior to do those things, and you can get the benefits right from your garden. Every year, even after your garden's established, you'll need to bring in compost. You'll have to mulch. You'll have to go through pulling weeds can be physical. Repairing your beds. All of those things are physical. And while I'll be honest with you, when it's August and it's 98 degrees, I am not looking at those things as a benefit. When we take a step back and we look at it overall, I think we can all agree it is beneficial to our overall physical health. Another benefit to gardening is it requires constant movement. As we discussed earlier, and I don't mean just physical things, right? Carrying heavy stuff or whatever. Even going from your desk out to your garden, you're walking. If you have a garden like ours where the elevations change regularly, you're walking uphill and downhill. Every time you forget a garden hoe or clippers and you got to go back to the shed, all of those things are beneficial to your short and long-term health. The other thing I'd like to point out, as much as I hate weeding is really good, especially I'm in my mid-40s now and I'm getting older. And as we do that, doing things like stretching regularly, simple as bending down and standing up, multiple times throughout the course of the day, that's what happens in the garden. When you have to weed the garden, you get down, you weed, you stand up, you have to rake everything. So all of these small movements, all of these things that force us to be flexible, and again, they can be annoying in the time, but when you think about it, as we get older, the things we want to be able to maintain, we want to be able to maintain our mobility, we want to maintain our flexibility, we want to be able to walk somewhere without losing our breath, that sort of thing. Garden inherently improves your quality of life in all of these areas. So for me personally, now that I've taken the time to think about this video, I'm going to stop trying to complain so much about those things. Well, no, I still hate weeds. But other than that, I'm going to stop trying to complain about everything else. And the final thing we'll discuss about our physical health in the garden is sort of an amalgamation of several different things, but it's a combination of the fresh air and the sunlight, and it does give you mental health benefits like we discussed earlier. The vitamin D that you get from the sun, it plays several important parts in your body. Believe it or not, it does go into mental health. Vitamin D allows you to absorb several of your serotonins, norepinephrine, that sort of thing. It also plays a huge part in your overall health, helping you absorb calcium. And as we get older, that's something that we think about. You younger folks, this may not be as big of a deal to you right now, but as you get older, absorbing calcium can be kind of a big deal. And in today's world where we're more sedentary, almost all of our entertainment options require sitting down. I like to play video games, and obviously that's not real physical either. So making sure that we get outside, we tend our garden for our food and that sort of thing, that is going to just innately expose you to vitamin D from the sun. So that's an important thing to think about. Also, fresh air again, is good for your mental health, but as far as your physical health, it is way better for your body to get outside where you're not breathing a recycled version of the air, where you can just take a deep breath. It's not near as congested or as contaminated as most of the inside air is. Those also have a huge amount of health benefits. So overall, while a lot of these things kind of do overlap from your mental health and your physical health, I think we can all agree that, if we look at just our person as a whole, both of those are incredibly important. I wouldn't choose one over the other. I wouldn't want to be super physically healthy and have terrible mental health, or, vice versa. So when we step back and we look at what we're doing in the garden, yes, I'll be the first to admit I started my gardening journey because I wanted delicious tomatoes and I couldn't find them. Over the years, I've learned that gardening is super important in the way that I live my life now. It's almost a lifestyle where most of my exercise comes from the garden. A lot of my, meditation and the ability to let the day's events go, that sort of stuff, all of that comes from the garden as well. So I hope this kind of has helped you folks sort of observe these things in your own garden. And if you haven't, maybe take the time to consider them. Well, as always, I would like to say thank you to those of you who have made it here to the end. If you haven't, please consider subscribing to the channel. You can hit the little bell icon and YouTube will notify you when we upload new content. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like. Until next time, I hope you folks take care of yourselves. Peace.